For many of us, hybrid presenting is becoming the way of the future. And while a lot of elements of communication are the same in terms of preparation, how we open, how we close, delivery, answering questions, there are some considerations. So we're going to look at just 8 tips around hybrid presenting. And the very first one is number one, which is to consider, is hybrid the best option for this meeting? So typically we have hybrid for, often geographical or other reasons. We've some in the room and some virtually. But overall, when we're meeting, we're looking for quality of engagement and conversations to achieve specific outcomes. So sometimes we just need to sit back and think, is it a good idea to have some people in the room and some outside of the room? We may in fact decide that fully virtual, puts everybody in a more even playing field, and that could be a better option than the hybrid. If something is of particularly a sensitive and important nature, we may decide that it is worth geographically bringing everybody together for an in-person communication. So, number one, just think, is hybrid the best option for this particular communication? Second thing is to consider your room setup, whether you are virtual or in person. So starting with the in-person, obviously if you're in the in-person room, you've got people come in virtually, just make sure that those who are in the room are positioned in a way that the camera can pick them up both physically and audibly. If you are coming in virtually, just be mindful of your own setup. Be careful that you're not miles away from the screen, or alternatively that you're right in and filling the screen with your face. So a good rule of thumb is to have about, just a small space, I don't know if you'd call it 1/10, above your head, and just a little bit of room around you. And some people are of mind that if people can see your gestures, that can be helpful. And if that works for you, by all means, go for it. If you are coming in virtually, just again, be mindful of your camera position. Okay, tip number 3, it might be useful to set guidelines at the beginning of the hybrid meeting. And obviously one of the guidelines would be to ask those virtual and in the room to put their phone onto airplane mode, which actually I'm going to do this second. Okay. But you might like to have somebody who might be calling the MC, calling the host, that might act as the go-between the people in the room as well as those virtually. So just to pick up on, signals where we're watching out for maybe contributions in the chat, etc. You might also like to set up how you might take the questions, both in the room and those who are dialing in remotely. You might also ask maybe that those who are virtual have their cameras on at appropriate times. So that's tip number 3. Set some guidelines at the start, and obviously make sure that you yourself have your own phone turned to do not disturb. So tip number 4, probably following on from that, and it is a guideline, but it's one really worth giving it a point all of its own, and that is to discourage side conversations in the room. I don't know if you've been on the other side of that, but it is quite off-putting if there's conversations going, on as side conversations around the table. So really do try and, in a very polite way, discourage them. If there is any that do happen and you can't control them, make sure then that where appropriate, you just paraphrase for those who are not in the room what was going on, or even if it's not something that needs to be paraphrased, just explain what was happening so that they don't feel totally left out. Tip number 5, you might like to consider an appropriate icebreaker. Now, I know icebreakers are not for everybody, and they certainly don't need to go on and on, but just a very simple one like, asking people in the room just to share, one word, describe how they're feeling today or how they're feeling about the upcoming weekend. And maybe those who are virtual, again, depending on numbers, they might also verbally contribute, or alternatively just pop in the chat. If you want to take it a step further, you can ask people what's the most useless thing they have in their home, or their superpower if they had one, or maybe what's a song or a TV program maybe even an artist that you're kind of, what do they call it, your guilty pleasure. Look, just throw it out there. Consider, if an appropriate icebreaker is appropriate, just to warm things up between your in-person and your virtual audience. And number 6, consider whether you're going to sit or stand. Now, this would go for you being in the room and also virtually. Starting with the virtually, sometimes people will find that they're used to standing for many years in front of people when they're communicating, and standing virtually feels more at home for them, or they have a little bit more energy. So again, if you are virtual and you're standing, just make sure that your camera is still more or less at eye level. Before, I have a standing desk here, but before I had that, I used to just pile up these little boxes and put the laptop on top of it. If you're in the room, again, if it's appropriate and works, stand. But again, just be mindful of camera and sound. And again, just not to be moving too much, because even if your camera does track your movement, it can be quite distracting. So if you're standing, just keep your movements maybe within a little small square area. Tip number 7, probably one of the most important ones. You need to plan for engagement so that everybody, whether they're in the room or virtual, feels like they're part of the conversation. One of the ways to do this is eye contact. So for those in the room, you're probably likely to be looking around at them anyway. But for those who are virtual, make sure at times you give really good eye contact to the camera that is going out to those attending outside of the physical room. Plan to have questions as you go along, even if they're just little short rhetorical questions that give an opportunity for people in the room to maybe nod, or those virtual to give a thumbs up, or even a little, emoji or whatever, if they're coming in through Teams or Zoom. But do have those little questions. It just makes it all feel a little bit more conversational and makes people feel included. One other tip on the planning for engagement is to, at times, maybe use names. So for example, if you're going through a report and there's a particular element of that is relevant to finance, you might say, Mary, you've been in finance, this is going to be of particular interest to you. And again, when you're planning to use names alongside questions or comments, again, particular emphasis on those who are virtual, because those in the room, you're going to see them, you're more likely to use their names. So those who are virtual, a little bit more pre-planning can go a very long way. And the final one, use larger font on your slides. So I know myself from going into organizations recently, they would have maybe projected onto something like what's behind me here, a large wall or a really large screen. Now that we're in the virtual world and we have this kit, often it's a smaller TV and it's a bit smaller for everybody in the room, as well as those virtually. So a recommendation would be aim to have bigger size font, which probably will mean that you will end up splitting your slides a bit more. Don't be obsessed with the number of slides. Clear slides are better than having multiple slides that people can't actually read. So just to recap for you there, think about, is hybrid the best option? Look at your room setup, both in person and virtually. Set the guidelines at the start. Actively discourage the side conversations. Think about if you're going to have an appropriate icebreaker. Decide whether you're going to sit or stand. Plan for the engagement. And finally, consider a smaller font on your slides, maybe even less information, and look at potentially splitting your slides. So I do hope that those tips will help you the next time that you have a hybrid presentation or communication.